are Scott and Emily Armstrong, and we are global missionaries in the Church of the Nazarene, commissioned to the Mesoamerica region. When we say Mesoamerica, sometimes we use words in the Church of the Nazarene that not everybody understands. And Mesoamerica for the Church of the Nazarene is Mexico all the way through Panama, the Caribbean islands, and then three countries in South America. And we have been in charge of two different ministries for many, many years, and we're excited to kind of share a little bit about them with you today. One of them is called Global Missions Mesoamerica, and the easiest way to remember that is it's a 3D ministry. So we're discovering, developing, and deploying new Nazarene missionaries from our countries. And the other ministry that we're in charge of, that we're coordinating, is called Mesoamerica Genesis. And Genesis is an urban initiative, and it's helping us to find and create more presence of the Church of the Nazarene in our biggest cities in the region. And we're excited to share a little bit today with you about what God's been doing in our ministry. And before we jump in, we want to say thank you for giving to the World Evangelism Fund. We are direct recipients of your generosity. Every time you receive one of your missionary offerings or World Evangelism Fund offerings, it helps our family do what we're doing. We are able to provide the structures in order to train and develop new missionaries. We're able to provide education for the church and what it looks like to be a better educated urban church and what that looks like. And so we are very, very grateful for everything that you're doing in order to help our family live here, help our family serve. We live in the Dominican Republic, and we are excited to represent Nazarenes all over the world and to share a snapshot about what we're doing here. We also are really grateful that you continue to give to Deputation, even in this time that's different, even though Deputation is not, we're not together, we're not face to face, and we are very grateful that you continue to believe in the work that's going on in the Church of the Nazarene, and particularly the work that Scott and Emily Armstrong are a part of.
When we received the invitation for us to speak, and thank you also for that, we kind of talked, what are some of the stories that are recently happening? And so Emily's going to be sharing a story that has happened to us or happened in our ministry really in the past year, not really COVID-19 related, but I'm going to be sharing more kind of up-to-date information on how our family and how our ministry is tackling ministry and life in this virus or in this pandemic time. Mm-hmm. And so let's kind of start that way. First of all, I just have to say that God, when we thought there were doors being closed, God has truly been opening some doors. We've had to adjust certain things that we were doing. For example, we normally are training and sending out missionaries steadily. I mean, once or twice a year we do that. We do that from our home in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. We normally travel. I especially travel a lot, and I'm in camps. I'm preaching in missions events, and there's a lot that we do. A lot of that has ceased, at least in person. And so we've been trying to do a lot of that online. Now, our kids have transitioned really well, and they are doing online schooling. They're really finishing up right now with their final tests, final exams here in the Dominican Republic. And so in our ministry, we had a few meetings. We said, what does this look like? And we felt like God was leading us in this one direction. And you need to know that about 8 to 9 years ago, we were developing this material called the School of Leadership. Now, it's not a real school, but it's a material that's 48 lessons in 6 different books. And they deal with missions. It trains people in missions, and anyone can buy that. Anyone can do that. We had been frustrated because in the last 8 years, it was hard to get the books to the countries, to the people, down to the local church and all the members who wanted to do that. Still, some people had studied and some people had gone through those books and learned, and that was exciting. But what we decided is, what if we were to offer this through Zoom or virtually and just kind of throw that out and just see, hey, would anyone like to do that if we're training and we have some other people that are training? And so we got together kind of a poster and just sent that out. And I told Emily, I said, let's hope for 20. I think 20 would be awesome. And really, let's dream. Let's dream. Let's go for 40 people around our region. Several different countries that maybe during this time would say, we're ready for this. We want to do this and study some missions. And so we just sent that out on all of our social media. And 3 days later, we had 133 people that were signed up. I mean, it was like the miraculous catch of fish. You remember where Peter is like, whoa, no. Like, I like fishing, but this is breaking the nets. This is crazy. We had to restructure things. We had to say, okay, we're going to have a waiting list. And we started to mobilize a lot of other people that weren't just us. And so we now have like 6 teachers that are equipping, teaching more than 110, 120 people in this material. That's called the School of Leadership Specialty in Missions, right? And so look at what had happened. We maybe had heard of about 100 people in 8 years that had gone through this, that had purchased the books, that had done this. We didn't have the capability at that time to even go online. And God has allowed us to now, really in just a couple months, to equip all these people really steadily in different times. We have a time on Monday, we have 3 on Tuesday, we have 1 on Thursday, 2 on Saturday. It's just, we're equipping so many different people, and God is opening doors even in the pandemic.
Yeah, Scott used that word restructuring. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we feel like God continues to do, but it's not something that's new, even though we're in a different time right now, because a piece of what our urban ministry is really helping the church think about what are some of the things that we do that we need to restructure, that we need to think about differently, that we need to be more creative in order to be a presence in the city center. And a quick story that I want to share with you is from the city of Querétaro, Mexico. And 2 years ago, we deployed a missionary team of 4 women to go to that city and to create Nazarene presence. We have one church that is currently meeting there, 2 years ago that was currently meeting there. And it's a city of over 2 million people. And that is one of the biggest reasons why we are trying to create more presence, because we have so many cities and such a small presence in our big cities. And so they went with the ideas, and we had trained them to think about church planting and what it was like to be an urban missionary. And we were so encouraged with what we saw come out of their team in the first year of ministry, because they started to look at the gifting that God had given them. And one of them was a family counselor, and she said, I'm going to provide some family counseling services. And one of them loves soccer. She's from Guatemala. Her name is Jocelyn. And she was like, I'm going to start teaching kids soccer. And I can tell you, the minute that you bring a soccer ball into Mexico, you're going to have a following. And so they started teaching soccer. They went to a community center, and that was probably one of the biggest strategies that they saw bear fruit almost immediately. Because as they were trying to get connections and contacts of working in a specific community, they just couldn't, they would knock on doors, but because it was such a closed area, people wouldn't open their doors. So they went to the community center, started teaching children reading, and they started teaching them computer skills. And at the end of the 2 years that they had spent there, the director of that community center said that they had saved that specific town about $7,000 out of volunteer service because of what they were doing. But those connections connected them with 2 little girls. And Marielos is from Guatemala, and she created a children's club. And 2 of those little girls' names were Regina and Itzel. And through those computer classes and reading classes, they said, hey, do you want to come to our Saturday club? Do you want to come and be a part? It's just a couple blocks away from your house. Maybe your mom could bring you and drop you off. And it's about an hour and a half, 2 hours. We play games and we listen to a story, kind of what we would consider a really amped up Sunday school class. And so they were all excited about it, and they had known them from the community center, so the parents trusted them, and the mom would bring them every Saturday. And so they had started to build a really great relationship with the children, and kind of knew the mom, but not a whole lot. But there was one Saturday that Marielos received a phone call, and it was like at the very end of club when the parents should have been picking the girls up, and the mom was on the other end, and her name is Maritza. And the mom, when she called Marielos, she said, just crying. She could hear that, Marielis could hear that she was distressed. And she said, I am not going to be able to pick up my girls today. And I need you to come and bring them home. And thankfully, the missionaries knew where they lived. Thankfully, that they had already been in their home a variety of times. And they said, of course, we'll be able to bring your girls home. And that's something that we'll be able to do for you. And as they were walking through the streets and getting the couple blocks from the club to the house, they didn't really know what they were going to find. They didn't know if there was a crisis going on or if something terrible had happened. And as they opened the door, Maritza, the mom, was just crying uncontrollably. She was not able to stop. She could barely have a conversation with them. And the girls walked in and were very confused and distressed. And as Marielos and Jocelyn sat there with the mom, they were trying to figure out what was going on. All of the tears were coming. She was trying to speak as well as she could. And they finally realized that Maritza was in the middle of a full-blown anxiety attack.
Anxiety, that's something that has hit a lot of us in this COVID time, in this time of pandemic. Worry, anxiousness. And honestly, for our missionaries that were sent out to Quetzaltenango and to Monterrey, Mexico, right immediately when this all started to blow up, really of March of this year, we had to, talk to them. We were saying, hey, how is this affecting you guys? Let's kind of focus just on Quetzaltenango. And I'm going to say it because it's a long word. I'm going to say Shela, which is the way they kind of abbreviate and say the name of their city. That's a big city as well. That's over 1 million people. In fact, 1.5 million people in the western part of Guatemala, in the mountains. And we only have 2 or 3 churches that are there as well. We have very little, again, the word that Emily used, presence of the church in the heart of the city. And so we've sent a team out there, and those men and women have been doing a great job. But man, they had made some contacts. They had started just like Querétaro, Mexico, Emily had mentioned. They had done some of those similar things and were seeing some momentum. But then after that, imagine what happens when then you're told you can't even leave your house. Well, I was talking to them, and so I just kind of felt like we needed to talk about, well, what has God done? Let's not focus on the reality right now. We need to do that. But let's first of all just talk about what has God done? And they started to talk about, man, he's done a lot of things. But even just this very last weekend, before the quarantine was in effect, before curfew, and before we couldn't leave our homes, we had something called a maximum mission. A maximum mission is what we call in our region kind of a mission trip, but really designed to impact the community, not to paint walls of the church building or something like that, although that's important too, but really to make an impact through many ways. So one of their contacts, a young guy that was like junior high age named William, they had said, hey, why don't you come along with us? Now, William did not know the Lord. He had not accepted Christ. And he was just kind of a part of the cell group that they had started from really when they had started a few months earlier, right? And so they said, why don't you come along and just help us, So he was, doing puppets and he was picking up trash. And actually they decided to have him help. And he was sharing the gospel door to door. And he was, talking with some people that were his age and just sharing, hey, this is about the love of Christ. And after one of those moments, he came back to the missionary team and he was like, I was sharing with people and they had some questions. And I realized I've never really made this decision. I was asking them to make this decision, but I haven't. But I really like sharing about God's love, and I believe it. And could it be possible that I could experience that too? And in that moment, in that maximum mission, they were able to just lead him through that process, through that decision. They just said, here's what you need to do. He asked forgiveness for his sins. He accepted Christ into his life, into his heart. And right at that moment, they were sharing this and they were so joyful. These missionaries were sharing with us. And then they just kind of got discouraged and they said, so now we don't know what to do. Like we wanted to give him a Bible. We wanted to disciple him. And so we talked and we said, well, he's a junior higher, right? I mean, he probably is connected through some social media and has some internet of some sort. And they were like, yeah. And through this process, they started to realize we could probably invite him to a discipleship class and just basically disciple him, talk with his parents, talk with his family, and let's just see if he wants to do it. Fast forward several months, and here we are, and we just recently talked to them. Do you know that William has gone through the discipleship process? He himself has come to them and said, I really want to be baptized. And they're already leading him through leadership training. He is going to be, even as a junior higher, then a high schooler, later as an adult, he is one of the first leaders in that new Church of the Nazarene in Xela, in Quetzaltenango, Guatemala. God is still at work even in the midst of this craziness.
The midst of the craziness. That's exactly where Maritza was. And she finally was able to calm down, and the missionaries were able to listen to her story. And I can tell you, as young women, they sat there and thought, what are we supposed to do? All they knew that they really could do for Maritza at that point in time was to pray. And so that's what they did. They said, can we pray with you? Can we ask the Lord to relieve this anxiety, to free you from this anxiety? And that's what they did. And they testify, and Maritza testifies to a presence of the Holy Spirit that came upon that place in that moment in time. And she was able to stop crying, and she was able to pull her thoughts together and her emotions together. And the girls felt fine with leaving the younger girls with her. And it was not very long, maybe a day or two after that they called her again, and they said, hey, how are you feeling? How are you doing? Is there something that we can continue praying for? And she said, I'd love for you to come back to the house. I'd love for you to come and talk to me. And so they sent another one of their team members. They all went together, and Maritza was a team member as well. So Maritza's the missionary, and she was ministering to Maritza, who was receiving the ministry. And, the Lord just puts the right people in the right place, because Maritza has a degree in family counseling. Yep. And so as she was sitting and listening to her share her story and the reasons of anxiety, Maritza was able to talk to her about the mental and emotional things that were going on, but she so masterfully wove in the spiritual issues that needed to be addressed as well. And at the end of that day, just 2 days after that amazing, huge anxiety panic attack, Maritza gave her life to the Lord. She said, I don't want to struggle with this anymore. I've seen how you guys have taken care of my girls, and I want to start this thing as well. I don't know what it is, but I want to be a part of it. And so exactly what the missionaries in Guatemala were trying to figure out is what they did in Querétaro, Mexico. They started visiting in her home. Every week they would bring a discipleship lesson. They would talk with her about what God was doing in the pages of the Bible, and how she could grow in her knowledge. And she made the decision after about 6 or 7 weeks of having those discipleship times that she wanted to be baptized. And as they started to think about, well, we need to have a whole entire baptism celebration. There were other people coming to know the Lord as well. They started to pray that God would bring more people. And little did they know that Maritza's life would be changed so much that even inside her home, she was starting to make the difference, because she was living with her boyfriend at the time. And he saw such changes take place that he started to invite the discipleship into his life as well. And they sat and they started being discipled as a family. What started with 2 little girls that led to a mom that led to the boyfriend. And they said, we want to be baptized. Both of them were baptized a couple weeks after those lessons were done. And God was moving in their lives so much. He was calling them to such a commitment that there wasn't like finger pointing that was going on. The missionaries were really just offering the word of the Lord. And the couple approached the missionaries and they said, we really need to get married. We cannot be living together like this if we're serving God. We want to create a family and a home that is serving God, that knows about God, and we want to get married. And that was one of the most amazing testimonies for the missionaries, because as missionaries, sometimes you think, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And they had gotten to the point of knowing that God's word is living and active, and God was at work in the hearts and lives of Maritza and Jose, her now husband. They got married, and bringing the whole circle to a close, which is beautiful for us, is if you remember at the very beginning of when we started talking, Scott talked about the School of Leadership. Guess who is a part of that School of Leadership online? Maritza, and Jose. They are not only new converts in a big city, they're not only some of the first members of a brand new church in that city in Mexico, they're also in leadership training, and they're going through missionary programs. I have a feeling God is going to use them to be church planters or missionaries, or they are not going to stay in their own place. They're not going to stay in their own home. God has asked them to take a step out of their comfort zone. They've done it, and we're excited to see what God continues to do through them.
I want to read to you, going way back to the beginning. I mean, Emily just reminded you of the beginning of our kind of talk here, but what if we go literally to the beginning? Genesis 1:1-3. Check out what it says. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. We've memorized that. But then, check out this part. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And of course, then that wonderful line in verse 3. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. Amen. I mean, this is what we have seen in the COVID time, in the pandemic time, even before that, in the heart of darkness, God brings light. In the heart of hopelessness, he is bringing hope. He is a creator God, which means he's a creative God. And we are made in his image. Now that just means we were made creative as well. We sometimes have to tap in, and I myself have said, I am not creative. I can't do this. But God is helping our missionaries, even our family, to be more creative in this time. And I love that part right there in verse 2. It talks about just, it was formless, it was void, but the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. That's just like an image of God ready to act. And I believe in this time, in this pandemic time, even though we have to admit, there has been a lot of anxiety, there has been a lot of worry, there has been a lot of hopelessness and darkness, and we don't minimize that. But we also recognize that God is hovering over, in his Spirit, he is hovering over, and he is orchestrating his purpose in our lives and through us in his world.
And so as we start to think about what God's doing in our ministry and what he's asking us to do, we know that his plan has not changed. We know that even though all the circumstances around us look completely different, we are committed to knowing that the city is important to God. And the city needs to be important to us as Nazarenes. When I look at that verse and I see that it says, and the earth was formless and empty and darkness was over it, I can see the parallel so much to the way the church feels about the city. It's a hard place. I will tell you, anybody that lives in the city, it is hard to start a church in the city, but it's not impossible. And it's the things that we feel like are impossible are what we need God to be at work at the most. And in these days, the challenge to us and the challenge to you is in the things that feel like they're formless and void and dark. What is it that God is saying? Let there be light, because we are the church and we are light in the darkness. And even though we feel like there's chaos all around us, God calls us to create order, and he brings light to these dark places. He's called us to go. He's called us to not just say, well, we're going to wait and see what happens. He says, go out. The harvest is now. The harvest is ripe. And we want to be a part of what's going on in God's heart and what's going on in God's mind. His reconciling work of this world has not changed. We can see it in the stories of what happened in Mexico 2 years ago and what's bearing fruit today in a school of leadership. And we can see it in new people in a school of leadership that are going to be the future leaders of the Church of the Nazarene of our region. We're excited to see what God is doing. We're excited to be a part of it with you. Thank you for sending us as missionaries. Thank you for being a part of God's work. And we continue to leave a challenge for you to ask God how he wants you to be at work in your very own city. Thanks for inviting us to be with you this morning, this afternoon, this evening, whenever you're watching this. May God bless you.